apparently we were successful because we're back for another episode of Scotch Talk. This time we're here with Stu and Gorilla Logic. I'm of course John Rose, and this is James Ward of Adobe.
Hello everyone.
Full disclosure, I do work at Gorilla Logic, but I thought we'd catch up.
For now.
Uh-oh.
And we'll see how this goes.
So we didn't have any Scotch, so we're doing a Blue Moon today. So
This episode is sponsored by
all enjoy Blue Moon. Stu created an open source project called FlexMonkey for testing, so we wanted to talk with Stu about that today.
And why'd you call it FlexMonkey?
Because we like the name. I don't know.
I think it's great.
So you can share more about the name if you want, but tell us what the heck FlexMonkey is.
Well, FlexMonkey is a UI, is a framework for UI. I'm always hard about this. For UI.
We won't edit that out.
Is a UI testing frame.
No editing on Scotch Talk.
Ask me that question again.
Okay. This will not be edited out. This is Scotch Talk.
It's just
Hopefully
raw.
it gets more entertaining the more alcohol we infuse.
Is it raw? We don't edit?
We don't
It's-
edit.
All right, well, don't
like,
ask.
it's like drinking your Scotch neat.
So,
All right, I'm
Stu, can you share with us about FlexMonkey?
I can. I've been waiting for you to ask me that question. It is this capture replay tool for Flex that generates Flex unit
Some
tests.
call that record playback, right?
Indeed.
Okay.
What did I say?
I don't know. I just wanted to make sure I knew what we were talking about.
Record, playback, capture, replay.
All right.
So unit tests. So it usually when you do automated testing, you're not doing unit testing, right?
You know, this is where we're getting into religious ground of, what's a unit test? I mean, for us here, we don't really distinguish between unit tests versus, integration tests versus, functional tests.
Solid test.
Well, there's the tests that developers do, and there's the tests that QA guys do, and we see those as being qualitatively different purposes.
Right.
Developer testing being principally to guard against regression, QA testing being to
Sure.
assure quality. So, since what you're trying to do is guard against regression, if that's better suited by, driving the UI, why not do it that way? So,
Because your UI could regress, or you could discover regressions through testing your UI.
right. So, I mean, it's sort of, well, let me ask you, so where do you come down on this, James?
I'm an evangelist. I don't test. It's a great thing to do.
But as the
So you think testing is stupid?
you don't
Testing
test
is
your
not my
demos?
problem. Testing is not my problem.
But let me ask it this way. I mean, we touched a bit on it in our last episode. I don't know when this will air. It might be 10 episodes ago. Is Flex Unit sufficient to test the Flex application from a developer's perspective is really the question. Obviously, I think no, but do you have a different take on that, or do you?
Flex applications are interesting, right? When you're building a Flex application, it's just UI, but it's obviously it's only useful as it's connected to a back end.
Sure.
And so you can test the little bit of logic that exists client side, but that's probably not going to really reveal problems when you actually deploy the thing, right? And if you change an interface on your back end, you're not going to know about that until you run a real test hooked up to the back end. If you change test on the client side, unless you're building like a framework, then that's probably going to be found when you try to compile the thing. So I think FlexMonkey is interesting just because really, in my mind, the useful testing on Flex is testing that actually tests the real application, not just the interfaces.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as I said, to prevent regression, you need to exercise the app, and it's people. Yeah, there's people that get very religious about, well, unit test needs to have needs to be very narrowly focused. We are really just looking at, well, let's back up. We also, in terms of religious dogma, we don't feel that code coverage is critical for developer tests. What you're trying to guard against regression, and that typically doesn't require 100% code coverage. Usually, if you're just covering the main lines, you're gonna catch most regression that occurs.
It's interesting, I think, when we try to apply the paradigms that are great for frameworks to application development, because if you're developing a framework, things like specific unit tests that are testing small pieces of functionality and doing code coverage are probably pretty important because a lot of people are depending on your library. But if you're building an actual end-user application, I don't think those rules necessarily apply.
I think that's
debatable.
I think that I think that that's an excellent point. That a framework does require, is fundamentally different. Would does lend itself to more of that low level, does really require more of that low level testing. Because it's going to be exercised in all kinds of crazy ways that you don't anticipate, whereas code that's built into an app, it's like, well, this is how it's used. But
So if I was building a Flex library, I probably wouldn't use FlexMonkey to test my library. I might, maybe. It might be in addition to my unit tests that I've written to test my interfaces.
it's again, I mean, it's sort of, if you think of, a code stack, and you think about some call that you're going to make. And let's say if you were building your app kind of bottom up, so I guess a purist would kind of like build a little piece, write the unit tests around it, go up higher, go up higher, go up higher. But there's another approach where you kind of build a whole stack of code and then exercise it from the top down, right? And so so that's what I said. For us, it's just sort of like, well, what's the easiest way to invoke the code that we need to be able to exercise here? So a lot of times, going way up the stack on a call, and it might need going all the way out to the UI to drive it all the way from the outside in.
Right.
So it's just sort of, how do you want to kick off the code, basically, is really the...
Yeah, we don't certainly say that's the only way to test, right? We find that right level. There's just no religious affliction that has to be at this level, but we may have tests at this level.
Oh, yeah, no,
and this level.
of course.
Yeah.
So, as a comparison, there are automated testing tools that are very expensive, right? Like Mercury, and then there are ones that Java developers are pretty familiar with, like Selenium. Would this be something that someone could use instead of those?
It's definitely something that somebody uses instead of Selenium, because it definitely does the same thing that Selenium does. It just approaches it from a different. It approaches it from a different approach. And what was the other one? So Selenium
Mercury
versus Mercury. Well, so Mercury is full-blown QA tool, high-end QA tool.
More for a tester rather than a developer.
Right, geared for a non-programmer,
Right.
for one. Geared for not only doing record playback, but also doing checkpointing of state that can be automatically validated.
Right.
And very much designed for, blanketing the UI. I mean, for assuring quality. Again, as a developer, you're trying to guard against regression. As a QA guy, you're trying to exercise every part of the app, make sure it's doing the right thing. So those tools provide, it makes it easier to kind of blanket the application and automate a lot of the verification. At the same time, they're not good tools for developers because they're a little bit too much of, it's hard to manage. Developer testing lends itself to more of a pinpoint approach, and not so, and because of the volatility when you're writing code, you can't really checkpoint state so much.
Right.
You really, I want to check for these specific things on these components as opposed to just checking overall application state. So I think that, so Mercury is definitely for a different purpose. Selenium, different audience, QA guy. Selenium's definitely, developer, well, QA person, actually Selenium, I guess,
Could use it, but
Well, I guess if you could use Selenium for QA testing. Well, the thing is, with the one thing that there's a couple of big differences between FlexMonkey and Selenium, aside from technically and how they do their thing, is that Selenium is totally script-based. You're not writing any code.
Right.
FlexMonkey, definitely you need to know ActionScript to use it. You're writing your
Yeah, so we didn't touch very much on that. FlexMonkey, you record and it's generating Flex unit tests for you, right? And you're using ActionScript code versus JavaScript or other different languages in the other tools, right? I think
Right,
that's
with
an-
Flex Unit, with FlexMonkey, you're linked into the app. So you're right inside the app, and inside the test you can be interrogating, Flex objects, ActionScript objects, as well as doing, just regular kind of UI interrogation stuff.
Which was important to us, right? Some of the things we looked at, it was like, oh, learn Ruby or learn X language to now test. And we wanted that JUnit paradigm, right? Where writing Java code, I want to write Java code to test.
Right, absolutely.
So I think that's one of the things, though, that makes it very more towards the developer side than the QA side, right? Do your QA people write code? Maybe, but...
Right, typically your QA guys aren't writing code. They want to just do record playback, and then, those tools, of course, have scripting languages too.
Yeah.
But it's a big advantage, we think, of FlexMonkey that you can get in there and write code. And again, this gets back to this idea of, are you purely just going to write tests that run against the UI versus stuff that's, mucking around in the internals of your app. We don't see any reason why in a single test you might hit the UI, then go, do some things programmatically internally. It's like whatever you got to do to, to exercise the code and validate it.
you've been around, I think, longer than John and I in the programming world.
Yes, I'm old.
That's why I'm getting fired.
For the
Thank you.
television audience. That's not the lighting. I am old.
So, in the client-server days, did we do testing as software engineers?
No,
No. Okay. Because I was trying to think of.
there wasn't any testing.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Not even QA?
So much easier.
There wasn't really.
So we could just say we're old school and throw testing out?
Because
No, I
I
mean,
mean, like in the client-server days, did we test just the client side? And if so, how did we test it? It would
Yeah,
seem
what does
like
that even mean?
it would seem like
No,
if
there
we
was no
wanted
such
to
thing.
test the client, then we would have to test the UI, right? That's our test, is to test the whole client side, not to test the small pieces of functionality that exist on the client side, but to test the actual client.
So as we go up the stack, there's less value in unit testing, where it's very easy to test some Hibernate call, right?
Right.
But I get to the UI, and what value does it have on its own? Where last project I was on, tons of process-oriented business logic that we could test with unit tests, but things that drove the UI, that wasn't a Flex app. We used HTML unit as similar to FlexMonkey, where you're a client of the application and you're doing these things to validate from the top.
So let's say that you had a typical CRUD application in Flex, and all of your CRUD operations are going to the server and actually being performed there. Your user interface is pretty simple, right? What would be a valid test if I have a very simple CRUD application? What would a test that I would want to do look like, and then how would I do that in FlexMonkey?
Well, I mean, simply, I think a simple rule of thumb that we typically have here is that you certainly want to automate. As I said, we're not striving here, and again, get into a religious argument, but we don't strive for 100% code coverage. What we tell our people is, at minimum, any programmer, all programmers test, or, any programmer that shouldn't be fired tests. And so it's not so much
Unless
a
they're
question.
writing demos.
So that's why when people talk about 100% code coverage, it's like, well, but you got to test all the code, right? But hopefully, the reasonable expectation is that as people are writing code, I'm working on a UI. I write some code. I bring up the UI and I muck around with it, right? It's not like who doesn't do that? So really the question is, okay, so which of those tests need to be automated so they can be repeated? Because you can't do that manual thing over and over and over, and especially to do regression testing, you don't even remember what the manual test you did. So the first thing we say is, look, any programmer, anytime they make a change, before they check in, they're typically going to have some stupid scenario that they run through, right? So, for your CRUD example, add something, update it, delete it, right? They just run through for one thing. They have the record that they always put in and they always look at. You would definitely automate that, because...
Right. Why have to click through on your own? Why not let...
Right, just automate it.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. So the thing that I, as a developer, would usually do to test my application, I could save some time by automating that using FlexMonkey.
Right, not necessarily checking for all the corner cases and et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's not to say that, look, the more the better. And there's...
And I might find some bug in my application that I would normally have to remember to test for every time, but now I just add it to my
well, and I was just going to say, we additionally, so we start with, look, at a minimum, you got to have like that kind of mainline test should be automated. Definitely, we like if you have a bug, expose it through a test, right, and then fix it and add that to the suite. Right? If people just start with that, it's huge. A lot of people, I think, because of this whole 100% code coverage thing, a lot of people just never start writing tests because they're just overwhelmed, especially if you're deep into a project, you already got a lot of code. But we've seen it again and again, where we'll go into shops, we're working with customers, and they've got a big app, they got no automated tests. We're like, look, just start. Start by just automating those core flows, start adding the ones for the bugs, and very quickly you have a very comprehensive suite. And any testing helps, any automated testing helps. Yeah. It's not all or none. So you don't have to be overwhelmed by, oh my God, how are we ever going to write automated tests for this whole system? Yeah. Just start.
Well, I think what really is making sense to me, which I've never really thought about in these terms, which is silly, but the fact of an automated test, meaning I'm automating the things that I usually do as a developer to test what I'm working on.
Right, that you do as a developer.
It's a very logical place to start, though, when you start to think about it.
Yeah.
Unless you're a loser, right. Unless you're a developer, like just
or only writing demos for Adobe.
Yeah.
So,
right.
wanted to move forward. In terms of moving forward a bit, I was going to throw out quickly that whole conversation, there's a Google group for FlexMonkey, and Stu's been having this interaction with Leaf. I don't know Leaf's last name, or I would credit him.
I don't know either. Leaf from Atlanta.
But having this discussion in a very interesting way. So check out the groups to kind of get more into the guts of, what testing means. And obviously, you don't have to buy the Gorilla religion on testing. If you're a 100% code coverage person,
You can
still
definitely
get
do that
great
with
value from
FlexMonkey too,
FlexMonkey.
absolutely.
I'm not sure what that even means though in Flex. I mean, are you testing every single class, and
Code
every
coverage
single
on every
method?
line of code.
It's
That's
just-
the Google guys. Sorry, Google, I love you guys. So I did want to jump into licensing, and first off, what FlexMonkey's licensed as, and then obviously there's the automation API and the limitation with FlexBuilder, and maybe with the Adobe guys here, you can
Sure.
make your fleet for
Oh, yeah, we got
cheaper
Adobe.
FlexBuilder Pro options so that more people can use FlexMonkey. So you talk to us about that?
We're Apache 2, which means, copy center license, so that means take the code down to the copy center and make as many copies as you want. So, in other words, you can hack it, you can commercialize it, just
Enjoy.
you can do anything you want with it. We
It's so
do,
communist. It's like,
indeed,
yeah.
indeed.
Isn't it?
Well, no, I mean, actually, I
And
think.
you don't even look like a hippie. Is the strange.
No, copy left is
Boulder,
the big,
Colorado.
GNU is the real communist.
That's right.
word.
James,
Close to
we're
Boulder,
in
not
Boulder,
quite to
Colorado.
Boulder.
We're
No,
basically
not
in
quite
Boulder.
to Boulder. Boulder is where the hippies are that believe in this crazy.
Right, with Apache, you can use our code without open sourcing your own code. With GNU, right,
It's a
it
very
infects
very-
everything like a virus.
Very balanced between the Boulder, Broomfield mentality. Yeah.
So, in terms of so we have this dependency on the Flex Automation API, which is not free, although it's included. There's a trial version of it in FlexBuilder Standard Edition, and then the full license is in FlexBuilder Pro. FlexMonkey will work with Standard Edition, although there's limitations with the Automation API that we're not actually. There's a box that comes up that says, you can't test anymore because you don't have a real license. But we're not. It's not really that clear to us what exactly the limitations are. I think it's the number of read. Do you know?
I have no idea.
So a better question though is when can we expect to see a full automation API and a free IDE?
I think as soon as someone goes and creates one. I mean, I remember in the old days in Java where we didn't want to pay Sun for J2EE stuff, so then we just replaced their jars with our jars, which were our implementations of their stuff. I don't see why someone couldn't create their own automation SWICs and open source them, right?
You got
Oh,
this
I
weekend?
certainly I could not do that.
Someone could.
I mean, because the automation stuff it seems to be doing some fairly,
Basic.
some pretty deep plumbing going on there in terms of the platform.
It does sound like almost like saying you're going to swap out, the collections API in Java that's so integrated into everything, right? Maybe that makes sense, but maybe that's a bit of a stretch compared to building a testing tool on top.
Yeah, the automation API right now is actually not well documented either. So I mean, the thing is with, it's not documented at all.
Fantastic.
So we were able to, we built FlexMonkey by modifying the Adobe sample program that exercises the automation API and shows you how to use it. We extended that and turned it into FlexMonkey, but you could not, I defy anyone in our listening audience to go out there and just start building something with the automation API. It is not, obviously there's documentation somewhere, there's just not public doc on it.
Well, in all
I mean, the
seriousness,
classes, there's ASDoc on it, but it doesn't really explain how
How to
it
use it,
works.
yeah.
actually, in all seriousness, I think you're building serious apps. Buy your FlexBuilder Pro licenses. They're going to fund the free Scotch giveaways on Scotch Talk. So I
Well,
only
there's other
tease
things
James.
in the Pro version that people are using as
Yeah,
well.
there's
So
absolutely
Well,
value in the Pro.
it's
version.
the charting components are only in Pro, I think, right? Are they?
And the profiler.
Yes, that's true. And the
what's other one I care about?
the performance profile and the memory
The profile,
profiler.
yes.
So, so if you're getting hardcore, it's certainly a good thing to have anyway.
Yeah. So,
But you can use FlexMonkey with the standard edition. You can certainly develop tests with it. You can certainly run those tests with it. It's just if you I think what it is if you invoke a test more than some number of times,
Interesting.
invoke a playback, it says okay too many times per session. You would restart your app, but like in a continuous integration environment,
That's a bit of
where you just fire it up and fire off a replay. Maybe it's okay. I'm not sure. We all have Pro, so we're not really sure.
Yeah.
free beer, non-free Pro. What else, James? Do we want to talk at all about the automation API, or was your stance that it's incoherent and undocumented?
Well, it's from what I understand from what little is out there, the automation API creates some kind of shadow components under the covers that receive, immediate events, and you can talk to them, and then they talk to their corresponding components. What this really means is that when you've got the automation API linked into an app, you can register for automation events. So when anybody clicks a button, moves the mouse, you get an automation event that says, hey, the guy just clicked on this thing, or just typed this into this thing here. And then you can use all that same information. You can then, the automation API has a call you can make to say, okay, here, make the guy click on this button. Using that information that you recorded, you can play it back in. Right. Using FlexMonkey, you can actually, we have a simple API that sits on top of this stuff that you can code up, click on this button or type in this field without recording. I mean, you can just start writing code and script your app that way. And in fact, the typical way we use the thing is you'll use record and playback to kind of debug a script, generate the flex unit test out of it. But then just start modifying it. I mean, as your UI starts evolving, you might just go in and hack the code directly, not even go back to recording and playing back.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Very cool.
So, can you use this in a continuous integration environment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. There's, they're flex unit tests at the end of the day, and I should also add that, they don't have to be, you can run this with any running framework. I mean, the FlexMonkey API is not flex unit specific, so you could take flex unit tests and incorporate them into any runner.
So now, from a deployment standpoint, is the application that I'm actually testing the same one that I'm deploying, or do I create an extension to my main application?
No, it's actually a beautiful thing is that you don't have to modify your source at all. You do have to link us into the Swift.
Okay.
So
and would I do that? Would I link you into my production Swift, or
no,
would I create a
no.
testing
You would
Swift?
compile
You would compile a Swift purely for testing, and then when you were ready to ship, you would not compile us in. But there's nothing in your source that has to be modified at all.
Right.
And we use this oddball mix-in facility. There's a technique that is also undocumented of using this mix-in meta tag to have a static code block. So when the class gets loaded, it runs the code.
Right.
So we have, FlexMonkey has that, so that, and what's in its static initialization code is, hey, open up my window and start recording events.
Right.
So when you compile your Swift, you got to tell it, hey, include FlexMonkey in there. But your app itself is completely not modified. So you want to put a special Swift, but your app doesn't get changed.
Huh. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's nice, very nice. Now we didn't
I
make
didn't know
that.
that
We actually learned that from AutoQuick.
Yeah.
Was where we picked that trick up from.
That's cool. I never really. That's good, because even if it's all the class is just in the Swift file, the class is going to get loaded into memory, and then whatever's in the static initializer is going to execute.
Exactly, which in our case is like, hey, open up and register for this.
So I've been
That's a nice
totally
technique.
off topic, but I've been thinking about dependency injection frameworks and Flex, and this would be an interesting technique to use there.
Right, no, you could absolutely build off of this and do all.
And if you want to do the spring injection conversation, we're going to need more drinks because it gets interesting with Stu. Sort of like the testing
That'd be
conversation.
another episode.
Yeah,
Dependency
we're
injection.
gonna turn off the camera, change our clothes, and film a second episode and tell you it was a whole other session, even though I'll have the same amount of blue. You got any more questions, Jimmy?
No, I think that was very enlightening.
Thank you
So-
for having me.
Yes, I was going to throw out a couple resources. We didn't mention yet that FlexMonkey is a Google Code project. Check that out.
Yes.
Stu and I just did a text interview for InfoQ if you want to get a quick, more concise thing. If you made it to the end, I don't know why you do.
If you're still here, then email us and maybe we'll send you a present.
Join the group, commit some code, right? Open source, give something back.
Absolutely.
I haven't committed anything yet, but I probably will. I think the Flex runner needs fixed, right? We're on an older one or something.
Oh yeah, no, there's a whole lot of stuff that the thing could definitely use. Although I should add too that it is quite stable. People are absolutely using it in the community for testing real code for real projects.
I am using
Ready
it.
today, it's well documented.
End
Right,
user.
including you.
So I'm John Rose. We got James Ward of Adobe Systems, and thank you, Stu, for
Thanks, Stu.
sharing today.
Thank you.
Great. Cheers. That's Scotch Talk.